the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict and efforts toward peace. Speaking from the Union Buildings in Pretoria during a working visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ramaphosa also hinted at an upcoming meeting with Trump.
I had an opportunity to speak to President Trump yesterday, or this morning rather, to discuss the peace process in Ukraine. We both agreed that the war should be brought to an end as soon as possible to prevent further death and destruction. President Trump and I also agreed to meet soon to address the various other matters regarding our relations between South Africa and the United States. We both spoke about the need to foster good relations between our two countries.
Ukraine says the deadly attacks carried out by Russia overnight and its territorial demands show that Moscow is the real obstacle to peace. The strikes, which killed at least 9 people in Kiev, came just hours after US President Donald Trump said Ukraine must make territorial concessions to Moscow. The BBC's James Landale has more.
The focus of this is this idea that somehow the United States would recognize Crimea as legally held by Russia. Mr. Zelensky cannot accept it without changing the constitution. That requires a referendum. And so what is puzzling diplomats is why the Americans are so fixated on demanding something of Zelensky that he simply cannot give at the moment. It betrays the fact that in the White House's perspective, this is very much a territorial issue. But to many European analysts and policymakers and the Ukrainians, this is actually an issue about sovereignty. It's about control of Ukraine.
For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulo Mwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
I'm Fuyile with the sports headline. The Nigeria House of Representatives has commended President Bola Tinubu for increasing sports budgetary allocation. Our sports correspondent in Nigeria, Thami Ngubeni, will break it down for us at the bottom of the hour.
It is a very good afternoon to you, Zambia. Good afternoon to you, Lesotho, Mozambique. Good afternoon, Côte d'Ivoire. Good afternoon to you, Nigeria, Ghana. Good afternoon, Africa. Welcome to Africa in Business on Channel Africa. I'm Thami Ngubeni. This is where you get the African perspective. It's where we meet to look at the latest in news, business and sport. It's gone exactly 7 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. Here is an open invitation for you to continue interacting with us on the various social media platforms. On X, Instagram and YouTube, you'll find us at Channel Africa 1. On Facebook, you'll find us at Channel Africa. Oh, and also a reminder, if you don't know as yet, we are also live streaming on YouTube. So if you don't want to be limited to just hearing us, but you want to watch us as you hear us, you're most welcome to visit our YouTube page where we are live streaming for your information. If you've got any news stories that you believe would be of interest to our listeners, both on the African continent and in the diaspora, do send us your story leads to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. That's newsroom@channelafrica.co.za.
Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
It has gone exactly 8 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. We start off in Tanzania this afternoon, where the country has officially imposed a trade ban on food and agricultural products from Malawi, intensifying a diplomatic and economic standoff that began with trade restrictions on Tanzanian produce by the two nations. A similar ban has also been imposed on any agricultural produce coming from South Africa into the Tanzanian market. Tanzania's Minister of Agriculture, Hussein Bashe, announced the decision on Wednesday. This after both countries failed to lift their embargoes on Tanzanian goods, like the consignment of bananas that was recently blocked at the borders. Malawi's Trade Ministry spokesperson Patrick Botha says they have not received official communication on the ban. George Mhango reports from Blantyre.
Malawi, a landlocked country, depends on Tanzanian and Mozambican ports for exports and imports. Tough times lie ahead if Malawi does not lift a ban on importation of food and agricultural products from Tanzania and other countries. Tanzania has come up with a complete ban on both the export and import of agricultural commodities between Tanzania and the two countries. Tanzania's Minister of Agriculture Hussein Bashe disclosed this on Wednesday after expiry of a deadline issued by Tanzania last week, in which Dodoma demanded that Malawi and South Africa lift their trade restrictions. He also criticized Malawi's handling of maize imports, noting the inconsistency in barring Tanzanian maize while simultaneously procuring the same grain through the World Food Programme, WFP. Tanzania has further said none of that maize will pass through Tanzanian territory, adding fertilizer exports to Malawi scheduled to commence on May 1st ahead of the country's planting season have also been suspended. Trade Ministry spokesperson Patrick Botha says Malawi did not comply on grounds that there was no official complaint from Tanzania on the trade-related standoff issues.
So as a ministry and as the government of Malawi, we haven't received any official communication from the government of the Republic of Tanzania. However, we are following the developments and we will make a comment at the appropriate time.
Malawi gazetted such a ban in March this year to save the much-needed forex and empower local farmers economically. But captains of industry and economists say Malawi should tread carefully on the matter. Gray Jean Kasunda, a consumer and media advocate, wonders why Malawi has not engaged their Tanzanian counterparts to solve the trade standoff.
Even though the Malawi government says they did not get official communication from Tanzania, Tanzania has an ambassador resident in Malawi. Why couldn't our government summon the Tanzanian ambassador just to get clarification on the matter? Our government ought to be proactive. The problem is that the traders are the ones that will suffer. But these people have no capacity to make decisions at government level. This is why we put people in power. So I advise our government to always be proactive, and they should work on modalities of engaging their Tanzanian counterparts before things get out of hand.
The ban action, according to Tanzania, goes even further, with Dodoma also halting the transit of any agricultural goods through its territory en route to Malawi. Despite this, Tanzania has acknowledged that diplomatic channels remain open, indicating that Minister for Foreign Affairs Mahmoud Thabit Kombo is reportedly engaging his counterparts in Lilongwe and Pretoria in dialogue aimed at resolving the impasse. George Mhango, Channel Africa News, Blantyre.
We will this afternoon be delving deeper into the dynamics of the economic relationships between Tanzania, Malawi and South Africa. We'll look at what the impact of this flow will be. Even transit goods going through Tanzania also now being put under this ban. How is this going to impact the flow of goods from the region? We'll be joined by the Agricultural Business Chamber's Chief Economist of South Africa, that's AgBiz, Wandile Sihlobo, as we look at the dynamics of the trade relations between these three countries. So what are your thoughts on this particular situation? One of the reasons that Tanzania has put forward is that there's been a prolonged trade imbalance and a lack of reciprocity between the three countries. And you'll remember that this is perhaps one of the reasons why Donald Trump himself imposed tariffs on various countries. Imbalances, lack of reciprocity, and trying to redress the decisions of the past. What are your views on this, and how do you believe this is best to be resolved, and what are the likely impacts that this is going to have not only on Tanzania but on Malawi and South Africa as well. You'll find us on all the various social media platforms, on X at Channel Africa 1, Instagram at Channel Africa 1, Facebook at Channel Africa, and YouTube at Channel Africa 1. It's gone exactly 14 minutes after 4 p.m.
Vue d'Afrique avec Joël Mouteba. Sadio, quelles sont les motivations derrière la décision du général Mamadi Doumbouya d'accorder la grâce présidentielle à Moussa Dadis Camara?
Alors, officiellement ici, c'est pour des raisons de santé, et puis le décret aussi a ajouté que c'est dans un élan de réconciliation nationale et c'est un cas social. Mais au-delà de ça, les analystes ils voient sous un angle politique. Les moins critiques estiment que c'est pour peut-être faciliter un petit peu la réconciliation que pourrait tenter aujourd'hui le CNSD.
Vue d'Afrique. Du lundi au vendredi de 15h à 16h, temps universel.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
South Africa's Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, has expressed support for the country's peace efforts in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict. Speaking on the margins of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's historic visit to South Africa, Steenhuisen highlighted potential trade opportunities in the agricultural sector between the two nations. He also commended President Cyril Ramaphosa's peace initiatives and commented on the recent decision to retract the value-added tax increase. Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe spoke to Minister Steenhuisen.
Well, I think it's very good from two perspectives, both from a geopolitical perspective. South Africa has got a very strong presence in the global south, and I think it makes sense that as a player in the global south, we are trying to broker a peace agreement between the two sides. From a trade perspective, there's huge opportunities for us to expand our citrus market into Ukraine, particularly given the difficulties we've had now with the United States of America. But also from an import perspective, there's huge opportunities around fertilizer and other agricultural technologies that could be bought into South Africa. Fertilizer has gone up over 300% since the conflict started. And what we actually need to see is a reduction in those costs. And if we could get an importation of good quality fertilizer at a good price, it'll help drive down the input costs for our farmers and will also then hopefully lessen food inflation as well.
And then your comments on what the two leaders have discussed here in terms of establishing peace between Ukraine.
Well, I think
and
it's very good, and I commend President Ramaphosa for his ongoing efforts to try and broker peace there. We do need to end the war there. Conflict is never good. And I think the presidents have had a very constructive discussion. We've had a very good discussion with our counterparts. And I think it's been a huge opportunity for us to be able to do that.
And then with this, do you still believe in the South Africa's policy of non-alignment? Quite often, South Africa has been, siding with Russia.
I think what you've been able to see here is that the president's engaging both sides. I think that's what you want in a conflict. South Africa does have ties with Russia through BRICS and other opportunities, but in this case, that could be good leverage for us to be able to broker some form of peace deal there from the global south rather than the vested interests of the global north.
And lastly, your comments on the VAT.
Delighted that the VAT's gone off. We said 8 weeks ago you didn't need VAT. We said very clearly how you could go about a budget without VAT. Every step of the way we were told it couldn't happen. Well, now there's been a turnaround, clearly as a result of a very bad day in court for National Treasury. I think that anybody watching that case would have known that Treasury's on a very sticky wicket here and it's likely to lose that case. And I think that that's why they're trying to settle it. But at the end of the day, I think those South Africans can be very glad that they're not waking up on the 1st of next month with a VAT increase. And I think we should all be happy about that.
And then what are you proposing as a leverage to that gap?
So it's very easy. The amount of money the VAT increase would have brought in amounts to about 0.7% of the total budget. If you can't find savings or deferments of 0.7% in a multi-trillion rand budget, there's something wrong with your accountants. So I believe that we can find the savings, we can find the deferments. I mean, we've already seen SARS has had a bumper collection. I think we can do it without having a VAT increase.
And we'll continue the focus on this VAT increase and the economic impact thereof later on this afternoon. That was South Africa's Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, speaking to Channel Africa's Michael Mbewe.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
Now, the G20 Agriculture Working Group under South Africa's 2025 presidency says international trade is key in addressing food insecurity. Addressing the Agriculture Working Group, South Africa's Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, sounded an alarm about the continued threats against the stability of global food systems due to climate volatility. The members of the working group called on international development banks to play an important role in mobilizing resources and increasing and improving the quality of investments towards more sustainable and productive agricultural models. For more on this, we joined on the line by the Deputy Director General for Economic Development, Trade and Marketing of the Department of Agriculture, Gwena Komape. A very good afternoon to you and welcome to Africa in Business.
Good afternoon to you, ma'am, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us. We've heard the Minister Steenhuisen calling for an inclusive market participation, ensuring that smallholders, women, youth, as well as those from marginalized communities are no longer on the periphery of food systems. Just how important is their participation in addressing the challenges of food insecurity that have been exacerbated by climate change?
It's important to note that most of the food that we consume is produced by women farmers, and despite the work that they do, they are not on par with their male counterparts who can be farmers as well or who are entrepreneurs in the business. The technologies that we adopt, the policies that we adopt, they are not inclusive. They don't bring them into the mainstream agricultural business. So if women, we know that if you empower a woman in a village, you empower the whole village. Whereas when you empower one man, the tendency is for men to just keep it to themselves. We have seen how women have raised even the extended family children without denying themselves. So what we are saying is that they should be included as part of this economy. The youth as well, our farmers, we are faced with the Asian population. They do not see agriculture as what the discussions were saying as sexy. And one of the farmers says we should not say it's sexy, we should say it's profitable. In order for the youth to come into the sector, they have to see money coming through. And we are looking at empowering them, policies that will ensure that they are included throughout the agricultural value chain.
Now, if we look at international trade, that was one of the components in addressing food insecurity. How does international trade influence global food availability as well as access?
International trade is quite important in that, for example, in terms of South Africa, we are a much more export-oriented when it comes to agriculture. And what that means is that farmers are able to get the stronger currency for the produce that they get out of their farms. And even the country as a whole, we are able to balance our books due to the foreign exchange. And by the way, remember that food security, we say you are food secure when you are able to have a colorful plate for each and every meal. So if I'm a maize farmer and I get that foreign exchange, it means I will be able to buy protein, I'll be able to buy vegetables, etc., etc. So it's quite important, international trade. But I have to indicate that the ministers of agriculture, as we are preparing for their participation in September, will be in the Western Cape. They just they are talking about market access, not necessarily trade, because the issues of trade are dealt within the WTO, but what we are advocating for is an open system, transparent and predictable.
You know, let's look at the U.S. trade wars for a moment, and perhaps also import bans in the continent. How can international trade be utilized, and in what extent do tariffs and export restrictions impact global food prices and accessibility? You were mentioning now that your main focus is really around issues of access, while the World Trade Organization will look at issues of trade. But we were talking a bit earlier on around the decision that's recently been made by the Tanzanian government to ban the importation of all agricultural produce from South Africa as well as Malawi. How do restrictions of these, I guess, between the continental countries themselves, but also with international countries, how does that impact the global food prices and also accessibility to good quality and affordable food?
Let me just get to the statement by Tanzania. I've just read a piece from that was it's like a piece that was somebody within Tanzania. I don't know whether it was the minister of or the whoever the authority is. They were just
I think likely it's likely the Tanzanian Minister for Agriculture, Hussein Bashe.
Yes, but it's just a talk. It's nothing that has been communicated to us as a country. Remember, we've got the National Plant Protection Organization, and for both countries, we have not actually. As South Africa, we have not received a formal communique that tells us that there is that ban. So for me to comment on that will be very much premature, based on a statement that was said, I don't know in what forum and what the context was. But what I can tell you now is that our National Plant Protection Organization has not received that communique, but we are trying to engage. And I'm under the impression that something has been arranged for the two to meet to really understand what the issues are.
All right. Thank you very much thank you for putting that into perspective for us. But it really does look in the wake of social media and access to information that sometimes the public tends to even have information before the official diplomatic corridors and channels have been followed.
That's the case. I have just seen a newspaper article actually being circulated, and for me, if anything, there has to be those formal communiques between the two NPPOs, so that we will be able to communicate to what the issue is. This for me, maybe I don't even want to downplay it I don't even know what the occasion was when this was mentioned. I did see that little clip.
So in the light of these type of circumstances and others that predate these, how does that impact the global food prices as well as accessibility to food?
Obviously, if when there are restrictions put on a particular commodity, it creates an artificial shortage in the market, and it becomes expensive for the people who are going to buy, and it's a wastage for those who are supposed to supply. They have to go and find an alternate markets for those products. Agriculture is very tricky in that if you have planted an orange tree and the oranges are ripe and ready to go to a market, you cannot stop that orange from being ripe on the tree, otherwise it's going to be wastage. So that is the impact that it has. It means the farmer, if suddenly that market closes, diverting it to another market may take longer because there are SPS issues, sanitary and phytosanitary issues that have to be cleared before any country can accept the product from you. And it takes months of negotiations between the NPPOs or the recipient of the product.
So,
for the market to be opened. Sorry.
No, not a problem at all. Let's perhaps sum up with the solutions and some of the solutions that were presented at the G20 Agricultural Working Group on the challenges that were highlighted.
You know, at the moment, it's a process that we are engaged with. This was the second meeting of the agricultural deputies in preparation for the declaration that will be adopted by the ministers in September. We had the first meeting where we discussed our priorities in March. It was virtual. Now we're having a physical meeting. It's for the first physical meeting. In this meeting, we had round tables for each of the topics so that the experts can just address the topic, the issues that we are raising. And from what we have taken responses from the member nations. Based on the responses, we are going to have what we call zero draft of the declaration. And that is the most critical document that is going to be discussed in preparation for the ministers, the policy direction that is going to be given by the ministers. And remember, the declaration, it's called a declaration if all the ministers of the 20 countries, now 21 with the African Union as a member of the G20, have agreed to the text. So it's still a long way to go to can say these are the decisions. We haven't decided as yet.
Well, thank you very much for putting us into context on the G20 Agriculture Working Group. This is the second meeting, so says the Deputy Director General for Economic Development, Trade and Marketing from the Department of Agriculture, Kwena Komape. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. She takes us to exactly 4:30 p.m. as we head over to the economic desk for the latest financial indicators with Nosipho Zuma.
G20 in Africa. Exclusive to Channel Africa, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Good afternoon. In your business indicators this hour, $1 is trading at 18.60 in South Africa, and Botswana is trading at 13.60. Namibia is trading at 18 Namibian dollars 60. The Zambian kwacha is trading at 28 kwacha 44 to the US dollar. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shillings 66. In Ethiopia, it is trading at 133 birr 41. In Uganda, it is trading at 3,000 shillings 649. In Tanzania, it is trading at 2,000 shillings 685. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 607. In Egypt, the dollar is trading at 50 Egyptian pound 95. In Tunisia, it is trading at 2 dinar 98. In Algeria, it is trading at 131 dinar 58. The Moroccan dirham is trading at 9.13 to the US dollar. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $3,016 and platinum at $974 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $66.74 a barrel. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Nosipho Zuma.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Thami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
It is exactly 4:33 Central African time as we head over to the sports desk for the latest in the business of sport with Figile Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Good afternoon. In our business of sport, we begin with the Nigerian House of Representatives that has commended President Bola Tinubu for increasing budgetary allocation to the Nigerian sports sector by 227% in the 2025 budget. The president tripled the budget of the sports sector from $18 million to $58 million in 2025, representing 227% increment. Our Nigerian sports correspondent Thami Ngubeni compiled this report.
Getting a hand on the budget for any particular sport in Nigeria is like asking an elephant to fly in the air for you. Not that there are no budgets, those budgets, after going through the rigor of screening and slashing, are approved with the administrators keeping a top secret on it. The president or chairman of the particular sport dispenses the funds after agreeing on bonuses or allowances to be paid to the athletes. Once the team wins laurels, it automatically falls on the government to reward such team as they deem fit. Football remains the king, with President Tinubu even rewarding Super Eagles for their bronze medal effort in the AFCON in Cote d'Ivoire more than those who won the trophy. There are no clear-cut reward system for the sports in Nigeria. At the beginning of the year, for instance, the Nigeria Football Federation approved a proposed budget of 17.6 billion naira for 2025 during the annual General Assembly. That budget was mere estimate, as they easily go cap in hand, begging the government for extra. Another issue in Nigeria is buying and selling of players are not different either. This is so because most of the clubs in the Nigeria Premier Football League are government-owned. Enyimba, for instance, which remains the only club in Nigeria to have won CAF Champions League back-to-back in 2003 and 2004, cannot give account of funds from sale of players to clubs, even outside the country. Such cash transactions are considered a windfall for the government appointees and their masters. That is why you could hardly get any government-owned club in Nigeria with their own CAF-certified stadium. The only exception is Remo Stars, which is on the verge of winning the Nigeria Premier Football League. Its owner, however, says that he's not interested in winning the league, but in selling players to foreign clubs and, of course, making so much money, for the club and, of course, for himself. But that's also is an interesting thing because he puts it into good use. He's the only club now that owns a stadium, and, of course, the Nigerian Football Federation are using, his private stadium now to host national competitions in Nigeria. That's the way it goes in Nigeria. My name remains Thami Ngubeni from Lagos, Nigeria.
For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Sport with me, Figile Lungwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. From markets to innovation, Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It is exactly 4:37 Central African Time. South Africa's second biggest political party, the Democratic Alliance, says Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana should resign. This after the minister withdrew a proposed increase to the value-added tax, which was meant to come into effect next Thursday. In a court battle over this issue, the minister and Parliament were accused of lying to members of Parliament in order to get them to agree to a VAT increase. In a statement issued early on Thursday, the minister says not increasing the VAT will cost the country $4 billion over 3 years. Dimakatso Lishuru has the details.
Briefing the media on Thursday morning, chairperson of the Democratic Alliance, Helen Zille, says Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana should be embarrassed for trying to force through an undesirable VAT increase to cash-strapped South Africans.
There can't be a greater embarrassment for a finance minister than to have been so adamant that a VAT increase was essential, to have repeated that in his court papers a week ago, to have refused to buckle to any pressure or any negotiations or any advice from anybody, and then now suddenly to have to back down and to avoid the humiliation of an adverse court order, rather to offer to settle before that happens. That in itself is a massive embarrassment for the finance minister, and certainly in a normal democracy, a finance minister wouldn't survive that. But as I have said, in South Africa, nothing is normal.
She says the minister only caved in when it became clear that he would lose the court case and face humiliation. On Tuesday, the DA, joined by another political party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, took the minister and parliament to court to interdict the VAT increase at the Cape High Court. The EFF argued that the minister lied to smaller political parties to get them to back a VAT increase, while the DA argued that the parliamentary process to vote on the fiscal framework that included this increase was flawed. Judgment by the court is expected next Tuesday.
We have yet to receive a formal written settlement offer from the minister. The minute we see what is in a formal written settlement offer, we will know what he is asking and what he expects the DA to do. What we will not do is withdraw Part B of our application. We will wait to see what the minister is proposing before we give any categorical answer on how we will respond to it.
Meanwhile, the African National Congress, together with smaller parties, held a media briefing in which they claimed victory for the withdrawal of the 0.5% VAT increase. The ANC, together with these parties, voted in favour of the budget that included the VAT increase. However, Fikile Mbalula, the Secretary General of the ANC, says his party only supported the expenditure side of the budget.
We welcome, as the African National Congress, that statement of tragedy. No disruptions, no instability, but the interest of South Africa come first and of our people. And that is our interest as the African National Congress. Our view throughout these discussions was on defending the expenditure side of the budget in the interest of breaking the austerity cycle.
These political parties, along with the ANC, accuse the DA of grandstanding and using underhanded tactics to get their way on legislation that it had lost. Kenny Kunene is a member of the Patriotic Alliance.
The Democratic Alliance indicated that they will vote for the VAT increase if a certain port was privatized, if the NHI was removed, if the Bella Act was removed. So the DA was going to vote for VAT increase had the ANC and the GNU parties agreed to be extorted by them. So when the extortionists could not get their way, they ran to the courts.
Meanwhile, the South African rand weakened at midday trade on threats to the country's government of national unity. For Channel Africa News in Johannesburg, I'm Dimakatso Leshoro.
For more on this, we joined this afternoon by the Chief Executive of Business Unity South Africa, BUSA, Kulegani Mate. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Good to have you with us on Africa in Business. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Thami, and good afternoon to your listeners.
So here we are again, Kulegani, looking at what is chiefly an economic issue, but so deeply entrenched in the politics of it all. What do you make of this, and what is your comment on perhaps the economic impact of these blurry lines?
Look, I think it's going to take some time for the full economic impact of this to really be discernible. But what is very clear is that the voice of many South Africans who are unhappy about the VAT increase has landed, at least has been listened to. So we welcome that. But of course, this decision coming as it does so late when many businesses had already, in some instances, incurred costs to try and prepare for the VAT increase is unfortunate. Ideally, we shouldn't be in a position like this, but as you said in the past, this is to be expected in an environment where we are still learning this power sharing agreement, and so, that agreement, power sharing in the country. So it is inevitable that certain things will unfortunately not be resolved in the way that we've become accustomed to over the years. But I should hasten to say, Thami, that while this is a relief, certainly for consumers who are not going to face a 0.5% increase in VAT, money has to come from somewhere to plug the hole of 13.5 billion rand, which would have been covered by this VAT increase. So that will either come from cuts in expenditure or indeed additional borrowing. All of that doesn't spell good news for the country. It delays an inevitable challenge and the pain that we will ultimately have to face as a country.
And I mean, what are your thoughts on how this is going to impact and what this is going to mean for public spending and how business then reacts to that?
So as I said, I mean, there are a few options. One is that government cuts spending so as to balance the books now that it doesn't have 13.5 billion rand. If you factor in the likely lower economic growth, then the amount increases from 13.5 billion rand to something like 25 to 30 billion rand. So that is one part of the impact. So if government chooses to cut spending, that will obviously have impact on service delivery to some degree, depending on how the decision is made. We would obviously hope that government does not apply this randomly or across the board, rather, where services like education, like health, and like security services are affected. Because already there's been cuts over many years that have, unfortunately, almost cut to the bones in terms of what you can cut from education spending and health. And so we would hope that whatever cuts, those services are protected. So that's one option. The other option, of course, is for government to increase borrowing. That just means that we are borrowing from our children and grandchildren because they are going to have to pay back this money. And again, that's not a great decision. So whichever way you look at it, there is unfortunately pain that this economy will face as a consequence of these.
We heard a bit earlier on Minister of Agriculture John Steenhuisen perhaps speaking more here in his capacity as leader of the Democratic Alliance, when he was saying that it's only 0.7% of the total budget, that is what the VAT increase would have brought in, and that it would be a sorry state for South Africa not to be able to make up those funds elsewhere in the budget. Where do you believe that the country can actually be able to make that up? I mean, you did mention, obviously, issues of expenditure and the social grants, etc., which government really doesn't want to be, cutting on because the people do need the assistance.
Indeed. So one of the things that the Minister of Finance said when he delivered his budget speech in March was that government would embark on expenditure reviews to determine we are spending efficiently so that decisions can be taken about how to cut spending. So we would hope that that gets accelerated, gets brought forward to review every spending and make sure that we get the bang for the buck, for the buck that we spend as a country. And so really that is what we would need to do rather than simply apply cuts across the board, as it were, because that will affect the kinds of services that we can ill afford to cut spending on. So we urge government to embark on these cuts, look at every item of spending, determine whether we're really getting value for money out of that expenditure. If not, take the hard decision to cut those programs and redirect funds where they are most needed.
I want to circle back for a moment, Kulegani, to businesses' reaction on this. You did mention that already plans were being put in place in order to action this VAT increase come the 1st of May. I know I've been getting many SMSs and many messages from the banks, various creditors, saying, please note that there will be a VAT increase on the 1st of May. What has been businesses' reaction on this turnaround? It wasn't anticipated because for all intents and purposes, we've had a finance minister that's been very resolute about the implementation of this VAT increase.
Indeed. So, I mean, the various businesses were gearing themselves to implement this increase because it is the law, right? And so we would need to make sure that we comply with the laws of the country. Now that it has been reversed, businesses have to incur the cost of reversing all of the preparations that they had made for this. So it's not ideal, but one has to understand this within the context that we've known since the attempt at tabling the budget for the first time that we were in uncharted territory this time around, where the tabling of the budget wasn't going to be smooth sailing. Indeed, it's proven to be quite bumpy, and we're not out of the woods yet. We think that there's still going to be quite a few more bumps that we're going to have to endure before everything kind of becomes normal.
And as we wrap up this afternoon, Kulegani, we are expecting the Reserve Bank to give another reading on whether or not interest rates will be lowered in the month of May. What ought we to anticipate? Do you anticipate that the Reserve Bank will lower the interest rates come May?
This is not something that I pay particularly close attention to, so I'm no expert in monetary policy. But given everything that happened, I would not necessarily want to raise expectations that even though we've seen an inflation reading that shows that inflation has eased compared to the previous month, but I think when you take into account everything else that's going on, I would imagine that the Reserve Bank will take a very cautious view and rather err on the side of caution than cut interest rates.
Kulegani Mate, always a pleasure. Thank you for your insight this afternoon.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. He is the Chief Executive of Business Unity, South Africa.
Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
Get ready to plug into knowledge with Channel Africa Conversations.
South Africa is stepping boldly into a new era of industrial innovation.
This week on Channel Africa Conversations, Peter talks energy. From renewables to policy shifting, innovation to inventions, and how it all connects to Africa's future.
Surely we can use batteries and battery minerals to transform Africa from an extractive economy to a manufacturing economy.
Do you want to stay ahead of the energy curve? Then don't miss our brand new podcast episode, dropping on Thursday, 24th of April on SABC Plus and on YouTube. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Thami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
It is exactly 4:52 Central African time as we head over and take a glimpse at the Ethiopian markets. For the latest look at the business and financial market developments in Ethiopia, we joined this afternoon by Merid Fiki Yerohannes, founder and CEO of Pragma Investment Advisory. So good to have you with us once again. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be on the show, as always.
Lovely, Merid. So, Ethiopian Finance Ministry anticipates spending less on debt service. This follows the country's recent debt restructuring agreement. Could you take us through this?
Yes, definitely. So this is part of the debt restructuring program, which is part of the IMF program, which Ethiopia has been signed off since 9 months ago. So as part of that, currently the Ministry of Finance
has been conducting a very extensive discussion with Ethiopian creditors who are part of the G20 credit committees, which is currently chaired by China and France. So as part of that, in principle, Ethiopia has reached an agreement of pausing $3.5 billion of a debt, which is due in the next coming 4 years, but it has been captured as part of restructuring in the next coming 4 years. So it basically gives the government a break in terms of settling this debt and allocating this capital part of its budget in terms of to use it for a capital expenditure and what have you. But more importantly, currently the Ministry of Finance delegation, including the central bank, has been they're in IMF. They're in IMF spring meeting discussing with the creditors in order to come under a memorandum of understanding (MOU), which is soon to be announced very soon after the spring meeting. And that's one of the reasons that the delegation is there. But in principle, Ethiopia has reached this debt restructuring agreement to post $3.5 billion of debt servicing in the next coming 4 years.
Some really great developments as far as the BRICS New Development Bank is concerned, and Ethiopia now set to become the 4th African member of this BRICS New Development Bank.
Yes. So yes, I mean, by the way, Ethiopia was one of the early African countries, including Egypt, that was part and joined the BRICS alliance back in 2024, right? So this is a big step in terms of Ethiopia being part of an integral part of the new changing world order. I mean, let's be frank. The world is going through two trade wars, and then at the same time, two trade wars, going through trade war, and then at the same time, there is a new financial order being established. So Ethiopia, as being part of the BRICS nation, it has been advancing and talking with the New Development Bank for a while. And I think their membership would be ratified very soon, and then the Ethiopian Parliament would ratify it immediately. This is part of diversifying its currency exposure, and then more importantly, like a year ago, so Ethiopia has signed a currency swap agreement with the People's Bank of China, which is the central bank of China as well, with the UAE as well. So as the world fractured in two blocks, Ethiopia is also taking an initiative to make sure that it benefits from both sides of the world order.
And the GDP numbers for Ethiopia also came out. How are those looking?
Yes, it has been the Council of Ministers has been actually discussing the overall economic performance of the country in the past 3 quarters, so in the past 9 months. Yes, it seems to be the GDP growth is in line. But more importantly, I think the more interesting numbers are since Ethiopia floated its currency back in July in 2024, and the fiscal year is about to end by early July 2025, and there is the remaining 3 months. But in the past 9 months, since the flotation of the currency, the Ethiopian balance of payment has improved significantly. Before the currency was floated, it used to be $3.2 billion. That was the aggregate amount, or $3.8 billion sometimes. It used to be the entire country's export value. However, right now, in the past 9 months, the export numbers is $5.3 billion. And gold is the biggest gainer. And just to give you your listener a bit of a context, before Ethiopia floated the currency, gold exports used to be hovering around $500 million, $500 million, $600 million. Right now, it's fetched $2.1 billion in the past 9 months, right? So what it shows that since the foreign currency has been corrected, most of all the illegal trades that Ethiopia used to lose now is being captured in the official market, and it's going to be reflected on the balance of payment of the country.
Merid Fikiryohannis, thank you once again. Always a pleasure. Looking forward to touching base with you again shortly.
Pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
He's
very
the
much.
founder and CEO of Pragma Investment Advisory, taking us through the latest as far as Ethiopia is concerned. It's gone exactly 2 minutes to 5 p.m. Central African time. That's how we come to the end of this Thursday edition of Africa in Business. Thank you for joining us wherever in the world or on the African continent that you may be. At exactly 5 p.m., we'll be taking you through to the French news, and the other side of that, Joël takes you into Vue d'Afrique. From myself, Thami Ngubeni, our producer Mabu Boloka, our technical producer Katu Madava, and on social media Nzako Mashana, we thank you for your time and look forward to spending time with you once again tomorrow as we take you through the latest business and sporting stories from the African continent. It's gone exactly 5 p.m.